Good evening. Our main story is that the worst serial rapist in British criminal history has been jailed for life by a court in Manchester with a minimum term of 30 years. Reinhard Sinaga, who's from Indonesia, was a PhD student in the city who drugged his victims before attacking them. He was convicted today at Manchester Crown Court of 159 offences against 48 victims, many of them young men, and the judge said that Sinaga would never be safe to be released. Police say they think the true number of his victims approached 200, and they've appealed for anyone who thinks that they were attacked to come forward. Our North of England correspondent Judith Morris reports on the case and its outcome.
This is Reinhard Sinaga as he wanted the world to see him. His social media accounts full of grinning photos of a student having fun. But Sinaga has many faces, and behind the mask lies the truth. A depraved monster, said by prosecutors to be one of the most prolific rapists in the world.
The total number of offences that we've prosecuted is almost 160, over 48 victims. As far as the judicial process, probably anywhere in the world is concerned, he's probably the most prolific rapist that's come through the courts.
In the world?
I would say in the world, certainly in the British courts.
Night after night, Sinaga would leave his Manchester flat to go and find victims. He took advantage of living in the city centre amongst the nightclubs and bars, and he made the streets outside them his hunting ground. Sinaga would often wait for drunk men to come stumbling out of this nightclub and then entice them around the corner to his flat, which is just next door. He'd offer them somewhere to have a drink or phone a taxi, and on one occasion it took him just 60 seconds to pick up a victim. Nearly 200 mostly heterosexual men made this journey, disappearing inside Sinaga's apartment block. Then they'd be offered drinks spiked with a drug like GHB, and that was the last they'd remember. Unconscious, the men were raped on this grubby mattress on the floor. When they woke up, they had no memory of what had happened. Sinaga would text his friends boasting of sexual conquests. They thought he was joking when he quoted song lyrics about using a secret potion of which one drop should be enough. But in fact, the drug wore off early on one man who woke up whilst being raped. He fought back, and when the police were called, they seized Sinaga's phone. They couldn't believe what they saw on it. The rapist had filmed each of his attacks. They found hundreds of hours of video.
This is an absolutely unprecedented case. Looking at that amount of evidence is challenging in itself. That's equivalent to 1,500 DVD films. We believe there's over 190 victims that have been involved with Sinaga, with Reinhard Sinaga, and 70 of them are still to be identified approximately.
The men who were traced were given support at this centre in Manchester, helped to cope with the trauma of being told they were the victims of rapes they can't remember.
Some men found it very difficult to process. Some men have suffered with their mental health to the point where some men have been suicidal.
How is it possible that someone could be assaulted like this and not know?
You may have had alcohol, you may have had a drug, and you may have been sexually assaulted, but there may not have been any physical injuries to see. And if you haven't got any physical injuries, then you may not even suspect that you've been sexually assaulted.
Reinhard Sinaga has shown no remorse. The judge remarked that he seemed to be enjoying being sentenced in court. He came to the UK from Indonesia on a student visa and is said to have applied for permanent residency. But his victims have said they hope he never leaves prison and rots in hell. He prowled the streets for years before he was caught. He's never explained his crimes. The rapist, considered a mystery as well as a monster. Well, this is where Sinaga lived and where so many men had their lives shattered. Those men still so traumatised, we understand some of them have not been able to tell their own families what happened to them. Others have seen relationships break down or have left jobs or university. Now, Sinaga tried to argue that those men had consented to have sex with him, and the trial judge described that as ludicrous and she told Sanaga he is a dangerous, depraved and perverted individual with no grasp on reality. But tonight he, as an Indonesian national, is beginning a 30-year jail sentence in a British prison. And the judge has said that any decision on his eventual release will be taken by the parole board, but it's her belief that it'll never be safe to let him out of jail.
Judith, again, thanks very much. Judith Moritz there in Manchester for us. Well, following the sentencing of Sanaga, the Home Secretary called for an urgent review of controls on drugs such as GHB, that is the drug that Sanaga is believed to have used on his victims, as Judith was saying. In the decade to 2017, 201 deaths in England and Wales were linked to GHB. For 84 of those deaths, it was the only drug involved. But it's believed that there may have been much more loss of life not reflected in the official figures, as our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly explains now.
It's been described as a party drug. GHB is said to reduce inhibitions and increase sexual pleasure. But as Reynard Sanaga has demonstrated, it can also be a weapon in a rapist's arsenal. It often originates from a colourless liquid, which can then be used to spike drinks and knock a victim unconscious. And in higher doses, it can kill. Eric Michaels was murdered by a serial offender with an overdose of GHB. He linked up with Gerald Matavu through the gay dating app Grindr. Matavu was a prolific thief who drugged the men he met to steal from them. The dose of GHB he gave Eric Michaels proved fatal.
He was a good person and he was taken advantage of.
Eric Michaels' family are campaigning for GHB to be reclassified. It's currently a Class C drug.
GHB is a really, really dangerous drug. It's the drug that killed my dad and it killed multiple other people, and it needs to be changed to a Class A drug.
Now there will be a review of whether controls on drugs like GHB are tough enough. It was ordered today by the Home Secretary in response to the Sanaga case.
It's all about the dose.
Professor Simon Elliott, an expert on GHB, says this criminal case has highlighted the dangers for recreational users.
There's a very fine line between a sleepy dose, essentially, and a dose that could cause deep sedation and potentially stop you breathing, especially if it's mixed with alcohol or other drugs.
Detectives have found no evidence that Reynard Sanaga killed any of the men he targeted. But the unprecedented scale of his offending has exposed a dark world and the dangers of GHB. June Kelly, BBC News.